Broaching the subject of death with an autistic child seems like, and it is a mammoth task, and it is really difficult, especially if you're grieving yourself. I think what I would say to start with is to keep it simple and avoid figurative language. So saying things like they've passed away, or saying that they've gone to sleep, or we're putting them to sleep if it's a pet, might be confusing because that doesn't really tell us what's happened. So I would use words like they've died or they're dead. It sounds really crude and really difficult, but it's going to be beneficial for the young person you're speaking to, because it's just going to be really, really clear. You might want to go into those kind of those sayings, like they've gone to heaven and things like that, just so if they're hearing those things, they understand what that means, or they might want to use those phrases for themselves. But I would keep it really concrete. And I would probably keep it quite simple and just making a statement and then saying, do you have any questions? And be open to that. And it might be that the young person doesn't have any questions at that time. They might need to absorb that information. They might shut down and say no, and that's fine, that's okay. But you can just make it clear, well, if you do have any questions, you can come to me later. You might provide a notebook or say you can write anything down, or, if you want to, you can text me later with your questions, because that might be a more comfortable way to communicate. When it comes to the questions, I'd just say be prepared, because you might get some questions that are very blunt. A lot of autistic individuals can be quite detail focused, so they might want to know things like what's going to happen to the body, where are they going to go. There might be questions that you don't know the answer to, like what's happened to their soul, their spirit, and then that's kind of a conversation around maybe your kind of faith and your beliefs. But it's okay for them to have their own beliefs. That's absolutely fine. And I think as well, you might get questions that might be around routines with that person or objects to do with that person. So they might say, well, does that mean that we're not going to have Sunday roast at Granny's house anymore? And obviously the answer to that would be like, well, yes, no, maybe. And you can maybe explore that and say, well, what do you think? Is that something you still want to do? Or is that special to you and Granny and you'd rather kind of, leave that ritual, that routine where it is, and we'll do something else instead? Or do we want to kind of maybe replicate that in a different way? My main tips would be use concrete language, keep it simple, start with a statement, allow for questions. And if you're not in the right headspace to answer those questions or hear those questions, it may be that you have another family member or a close friend that can step in and have those conversations with that young person. When thinking about supporting a young person talk and think about death and offer comfort, I think my main tips would be, first of all, to allow space for them to maybe ask those questions in private that might seem inappropriate or maybe not socially acceptable in a wider community, so they can kind of get those answers to those questions, and then we can maybe think about the kind of things that we might say to others. I would also say prepare other people around and manage expectations, and say they might not react in a way that you expect. So don't put any expectations or judgments on them. They might not want to hug you, they might not cry. So kind of setting up the space, the environment, so that young person doesn't fail, essentially. I have a friend who has an autistic son, and his uncle passed away, and they were thinking about what he could say to Auntie at the funeral and how he might comfort her. And they went through lots of different scenarios and they thought about what he could say, but when he said the things that might be expected, it sounded too rehearsed and maybe not very genuine. So what they decided on was just kind of like a gentle pat on the shoulder for Auntie when they saw her. And I think that's really lovely, and I think that's a really nice way to comfort someone that's not too invasive for yourself but shows that you care. So my advice to an autistic adult talking to a peer about grief would be to choose your peer, your friend, your person carefully. Choose someone who you can be your authentic self around, someone that maybe you don't have to mask around. Masking is something that autistic people do sometimes to kind of fit into a neurotypical world. So, someone that you maybe don't have to worry about maintaining eye contact with or worry about what your facial expressions look like. So someone that you're really comfortable with. You also don't have to meet with that person in person. You might be more comfortable with the text conversation back and forth. You might want to write an email, you might want to write a letter. And just know that there's no right or wrong way to talk about grief or experience grief, and that every emotion and every thought and feeling is valid. So in summary, I would say my tips for talking about loss is, first of all, keep it simple, use concrete language, feel free to ask questions, be prepared to answer questions, and that there's no right or wrong way to experience or talk about grief.